If Keir Starmer didn't appreciate just how tough the job of Prime Minister would be, I'm sure he does now. Nearly 3 months after the general election, and the challenges are piling up for him at home and abroad. Tonight we're in Milton Keynes. Nearly 60 years ago, it was built as a new town, famously, of course, complete with concrete cows, to ease housing shortages in an overcrowded London. Tonight's audience, as always, reflects the electoral picture, though, across the country. Welcome to Question Time. From the government, Nick Thomas-Symonds, who's a Minister for the Cabinet Office. He was also heavily involved in organising Labour's recent general election campaign, in which, of course, they swept to power. From the Conservatives, Nadhim Zahawi, who stood down as an MP at that last election. He's held several government positions in recent years, including Chancellor for a short time. Carla Denyer is the co-leader of the Green Party, a task she shares with Adrian Ramsey. She's also one of 4 new Green MPs. That's a record number for her party. And Zia Yusuf is the chairman of Reform UK. He's been in that role since July's election, in which Reform gained over 4 million votes and won 5 seats. Good evening. Welcome to our panellists. Welcome to our audience here in Milton Keynes. Great to see you. And, of course, welcome to you at home. Remember, you can watch the programme live on iPlayer at 8 o'clock if after 10 o'clock news is a bit too late for your bedtime. So let's start with our first question tonight, shall we? Which is from Philip Parsons.
If the UK's goal is international peace, how can most parties still support sending weapons to Israel while it prepares for a ground war in Lebanon?
So, the government issues arms licences for weapons companies to then sell weapons to Israel and other countries, of course, around the world. So the government has suspended 30 arms licences, but that's from a total of 350 or so. Nick?
Well, firstly, the government, as has just been set out, it was a difficult decision to suspend 30 of the 350 arms licences. That is because this is a government that respects international law. We always said that when we came to power, we would review the position, we would look at the legal position. If there is a clear risk that arms are going to be used in breach of international humanitarian law, then we said we would take action. That's precisely what we did in respect of the 30 licences that have now been revoked. And that is part of having...
Can we look at those licences, Nick? Because I just had a little dig into this, and obviously you're a former barrister. The law is something you know well. They were suspended on the grounds that they could be used to breach international humanitarian law in Gaza. So, components for F-16 fighter jets, the arms licence for those has been suspended, but not for F-35 fighter jets. Are they not both equally liable to breach international humanitarian law? What's the difference?
Well, no, because they can be being used in different areas. For example, I mean, the legal advice we took and we've accepted and we've followed it to the letter. That's precisely what we've done. But could I just also say that we continue to support Israel's right to defence in compliance with international humanitarian law. We continue as well to call for a ceasefire in Gaza, the return of the hostages, and indeed to try to continue to push for a diplomatic solution. And this applies both in respect of Gaza, but also in respect to the awful scenes we are seeing at the moment with what's happening to civilians in Lebanon. Further escalation there is in no country's interests. And the Prime Minister, together with the President of the United States and other countries, are calling for restraint, calling for a ceasefire. It's hugely important now that that's heeded.
Nadhim, I mean, obviously, there has not looked for a long time a more perilous time in the Middle East.
It is an incredibly dangerous moment for the world. I think we need to step back a second and understand what's happening in Palestine. The Palestinian people have been taken hostage by a terrorist group. That terrorist group is Hamas. What they have done to their own people is horrific. What they did on October the 7th was murderous and unforgivable. And I think, as Nick said, we have to just remember that Israel has to have the right to defend itself, and has for a long time had an agreement on the other border, on his northern border, that Hezbollah would not cross over the Litani River, yet they've been breaching that agreement. Some will say Israel also flies over Lebanon, and that is also a breach. So there are issues on both sides. You know, we're all grown up here around this table to understand that. But I think the idea that the Palestinian people want to continue to live under Hamas, or, dare I say, the Lebanese people under Hezbollah, is not true. If you go to the region,
but the question is,
and you hear people, they want rid of these terrorists.
Should we still be still allowing arms export licenses to Israel? That's the question.
Well, I think as the US took a very different view to the British government on this, and I think it's important to continue to ensure that Israel is able to defend itself,
so
as well as pushing Israel very hard towards a two-state solution, towards the day after of what happens, to help the Palestinian people. Now, our allies in the region, and we should listen to allies in the region, like the UAE, like Egypt and others, that will hopefully be part of that future, part of the new Palestine that should emerge from this dreadful, dreadful moment in history.
All right, let's hear from our audience. The man at the back there.
Yeah. Have we not got to the point where we're not talking about Israel, Palestine, Gaza, because there are people dying in all of those regions? For me, the question is, has Netanyahu gone too far? Has he got to the point where we need to worry about him like we do right now with Putin? So I think the decision has to be, are we talking about a person or are we talking about Israel? And I think that has to be divided into two different things.
OK, let me hear another point from the audience here, yes.
Obviously, we're supplying arms licenses to Israel. How can we prevent, if this all kicks off into a war, how can we prevent the UK from being dragged in to this war as it was in the Second Gulf War in the early 2000s?
Carla.
Well, the escalating situation in the Middle East, if it doesn't make you feel angry and sick, you're probably not paying attention, and I'm sure everyone in this audience is feeling incredibly distraught about it. Philip's original question, how can most parties still support arms sales to Israel? I agree. And as a Green, we've been pushing the previous Conservative government and the Labour government to suspend arms sales. And while the partial suspension was a step in the right direction, exactly as you said, Fiona, why would you stop the sales of one fighter jet and not the other, especially when there is very strong evidence that the F-35 fighter jets have been involved in strikes that killed Palestinian civilians? So while I do welcome the words from Keir Starmer yesterday, where he called on all parties to pull back from the brink, I agree with him, but he needs to put his money where his mouth is and use the incredible diplomatic power and responsibility that the UK has as an ally to Israel to put pressure on them, and that includes in trade and in arms sales specifically.
OK, let me hear one more point from the audience here. This one here in the front. Hang on, we'll just get a microphone to you. There you go.
Oh, sorry. I'm getting a bit fed up and sick to death of hearing this Israel's right to defend itself. What Israel is doing is barbaric. It is not defending itself. Defensive is when you do that, stopping somebody attacking you. What they're doing, these Palestinians who have no way to stop these bombs coming over, shooting down the planes, it's obscene what I'm seeing on the TV. And I don't know, it's so gut-wrenching. I do not know anybody with an average IQ can't work out what the hell's going on. Most of it is this Netanyahu. Now, really, I think that this, what we call the civilised world, should actually take action and stop that and do it by political negotiations. There's no way you go... And most people are saying, oh, you can't do it by bombing them to smithereens. You've got to negotiate. Then why the hell aren't they doing that?
All
We've
right.
got intelligent people with graduates and government leaders of all countries. Why the hell can they not just stop that? It's making me sick, and the people I talk to, they're so sickened by seeing these images of innocent people being bombed to death. And the way they're living is absolutely appalling.
All right. I hear your strength of opinion, Zia.
Look, clearly the suffering in the Middle East is extreme. It's the tragedy being inflicted on both sides is untold. As has already been said, it's a real powder keg situation in the Middle East, probably as dangerous as any of us can remember for some time. The reality is we have to ask ourselves, do we want Britain to continue to have influence over the situation or not? We have to act on the basis of how the world actually works, not the way that we wish it worked. If Britain... So we've got to firstly stop doing stunts. So when David Lammy withdrew those export licences, the reality is that's not going to have any impact on Netanyahu's ability to prosecute this war. That has already been proven, so that was purely a stunt. Secondly, if Britain stops selling these arms to Israel, there are many countries, including and especially China, that would gladly sell them that weaponry. And with that, we would relinquish our control. So what our ability to influence Israeli policy. So what we need to be doing is having robust conversations with everybody involved in this conflict, our friends and allies in the Middle East as well. We need to de-escalate, we need to end the war. Hamas must release the hostages, and we should urge Israel to exercise restraint in how it prosecutes the war.
But keep exporting. You keep
if Britain stops selling, you're treating a symptom. If Britain stops selling arms to Israel, all we will do, as is so often the case in recent governments, is relinquish British influence in the world. Other countries like China will take up that mantle and sell them those same weapons.
All right. I'm going to end it here because we had a lot of questions on the next two topics and I want to make sure we give them enough time. Sadly, I think this is something we're going to return to. Because as much as I'm sure everyone here would like to see peace there doesn't seem any imminent sign of it tonight. So I'm going to leave that subject there for now. Let me just tell you where we are next week. We are in Dundee. So if you live in Dundee, in that lovely city, or around it, and you'd like to be in the Question Time audience, go to our website, follow the instructions there. And then the week after that, we are going across the pond. We are going to Philadelphia, because you might have noticed there's a bit of a US election going on over there, and it's pretty interesting. Now, you might think, why are you bothering telling me about it? I can't apply to be in the audience. I live in wherever I live in the United Kingdom. But a surprising amount of people do watch Question Time over in the States on cable, on BritBox and various other things. So if you're watching and you live in Philadelphia or around it, come and be part of Question Time. This is what it's like. Come and be part of the Question Time audience. And, of course, for those of you in the United Kingdom, you want to watch hearing what American people think are the big issues in the American election. That's where we're going to be in 2 weeks' time, Philadelphia. OK, sticking with matters here. Muzar Murad, where are you? Oh, there you are. Let's hear from you.
Good evening, Fiona. Good evening, the panel. My question is the honeymoon period already over for the PM and the Labour Party?
Right. Now, Nick, obviously you will want to put your 10 penneth in here. I'm actually going to go around everybody and just get a feel of the room and then come back to you. Muzar, since you asked this question, what's your feeling?
Yes, I do. I think it's already over. They've not been transparent with the general public. I'm a Labour supporter. I've always supported Labour, always voted Labour, but I'm very disappointed. If there was a general election tomorrow, I wouldn't vote Labour. All my family have always voted Labour, but like I said, they've not been transparent. All these things, they keep blaming the previous government. It's just not good enough. Really isn't.
Wow. And you're saying that as a Labour supporter, OK? You're definitely not a Labour supporter, Nadhim. Let's hear your view.
No, but it must be pretty painful for Nick and Keir to hear that. I have to say that I've been in this position myself with my party, and when Nick was in opposition, they took advantage of the opportunity to attack Boris over wallpaper or other parties.
It wasn't just Labour attacking over parties, I might say. We had a lot from our audience about that as well.
I don't disagree. I just think what I worry about slightly, Muzar, is that, and I delivered the vaccine programme with some amazing civil servants and some amazing politicians from across the political divide. Sadiq Khan, Labour, Andy Burnham, Andy Street, Conservative, Scottish Government, Welsh Labour Government. And when we work together, we get some really good things done. And we have some outstanding civil servants. My fear for our politics as a whole, and Fiona said it in the bit that wasn't recorded earlier, that I am now retired from mainstream politics, is I think a lot of my friends will not want to go into politics because of the level of sort of vitriol over mistakes. I've just written a book, and one of the themes of the book is there are no superhumans.
Oh my God, we've only been on air 15 minutes and you mentioned it already.
I know.
That has to be something of a record, Nadhim.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. But my point was going to be, one was to demystify politics, to encourage more people from all sorts of backgrounds to enter politics, but also to say that there are no superhumans in politics. People make mistakes, and sometimes...
So cut Keir Starmer some slack, is that what you're saying?
I just think the focus should be on delivery for the country. I suspect, if I put my polling hat on, it's early enough in Keir's time in office for him to recover from this, but this is a pretty bad blow for him.
OK. I have to say...
I think you're right on that.
You never sounded like this when you came on Question Time when you were in office. I mean, it's a very, very different Nadhim Zahawi talking now. Zia?
I think Keir Starmer's honeymoon clearly is over. I think that's abundantly clear. This is a man who presented himself as Mr. Rules, presented the Labour Party as going to bring integrity back to politics. It's interesting, we're sitting here 3 months into a Labour government, having won a general election on the promise that they were going to bring change, and their slogan at their conference was "Change begins." We're sitting here on Question Time. We're going to be talking about sleaze. We're going to be talking about hypocrisy. We're going to be talking about one rule for the Prime Minister, one for everybody else. And it's not a surprise, Nadhim, that you're somewhat defending it and making comparisons with Boris, because that's exactly what got Boris into trouble. It was unacceptable then. It's totally unacceptable now. What's happened with Lord Ali, where, for some reason the Prime Minister saw fit for him to be purchasing his wife designer clothes, £4,500 glasses. I have no idea why anyone needs £4,500 spectacles, and then issuing him a Downing Street pass. And by the way, there is now news just hitting the wires a few hours ago that potentially, the Prime Minister has breached electoral law by misstating where his residence was. And I actually had a question.
What are you referring to exactly? Are you referring to the video that he made during the pandemic when
he had
Lord Ali's apartment?
He had represented the Electoral Commission that his primary residence was in Holborn, and then he gave an interview recently when he was talking about moving to Lord Ali's apartment, apparently because his son needed time to...
Just temporarily.
Well, but if you spend time there overnight...
primary residence.
If you spend time overnight, potentially, there is a case to be made that he has breached electoral law. My question is, if that is the case...
I'm not saying Lord Ali was a mate, but if
you've
even stayed with a relative overnight, you suggesting he might have breached electoral law?
That's not what's been alleged in this coverage. And my question to Nick is, if that is the case, if it is the case that Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has breached electoral law, would you call on him to resign?
He hasn't. It's not a primary residence, is it? By any stretch of the imagination.
Well, we're about to find out. But answer the question. Would you call on him to resign if he breached electoral law?
Well, will you actually go back, look at the law and what a primary residence means rather than make the accusation?
OK, let me come around, because I have to say, this is not something that's filtered down to me. I'm going to come round all of you in a minute, so get your hands up, those who want to talk about Carla.
Thank you. Returning to your point, Mazar, I hear you absolutely, and I think there's a lot of people in this country feeling similar to yourself. Labour were elected on a mandate of change, but now they're in power. When push comes to shove, their solutions to the problems we're facing in this country are to let the most vulnerable in our country, to let children in poverty, to let pensioners who are struggling to pay their fuel bills suffer. And they talk about needing to be honest. Well, I think they do need to be honest, but not in the way they're doing currently of saying it's going to get worse before it gets better, but in the way of acknowledging that we live in one of the richest countries in the world. The money is there in the economy. We currently have a tax system that is specifically set up to favour the very richest in society. If we made some changes to the tax system to ensure those with the broader shoulders who can easily afford to pay a little bit extra pay a bit more through equalising capital gains with income tax and introducing a wealth tax on just the super rich, the multi-millionaires and above, we could raise tens of billions of pounds that could easily save the winter fuel tax, scrap the two-child benefit, scrap the bedroom tax, pay the nurses properly and have money to spare.
OK. Right. Now, as you'd expect, those on the panel who are not from Labour are clearly going to say the honeymoon's over and it's all terrible. That's what we'd expect. You've been unusually magnanimous, Fiona. You don't quite know what's going on there. But I'd really want to hear from you. So, this woman here in the front.
I don't believe Labour has actually had a honeymoon. They had to hit the road straight away. I believe that they've got a hard struggle ahead, and we need to give them a chance.
OK. Man there in the black T-shirt.
I just want to say this is such a non-story, if I'm honest with you. With everything that's going on and everything like that, if you ever listen to like stuff like you talk about how Keir Starmer is the problem and everything like that. Yeah, we've had 14 years of Tory sleaze and everything like that going on with... I'm not saying it's perfect and all, but, like, there is more important things to go on about. If we're talking about Tory sleaze, we've got Boris Johnson, we've got... I'm not trying to point anything out, but even one of your panellists, there was a scandal going on with them.
OK, well, let's just clear what that is up. So, Nadhim, I will just say this briefly, and you can correct if I've got any facts wrong here, but also, Nadhim, you had to leave government, you were sacked, after an inquiry found that you failed to disclose while you were Chancellor that the Inland Revenue was investigating your tax affairs, and you paid nearly £5 million to settle that issue. That is what you're referring to, I assume. OK, just so we've made that clear. Do you want to respond to that?
Only that you have to own your mistakes, what I was saying earlier, that there are no superhumans in politics, and there's a whole chapter in the book on...
Oh, my God. You're going to have to leave the panel if you mention one more time. I'm serious. But, right, OK. The man here.
I've been a lifelong Labour supporter as well, way back to the Neil Kinnock days. Yeah, I was so disappointed when they brought in the winter fuel payment to the pensioners. We're talking about pensioners who are on less than £13,000 a year before they lose it. Yet a single person benefit cap is almost £15,000 a year. At least start the cliff edge higher.
Right, OK. Let's just... I'm going to hear a couple more points very quickly. Yes, man there. Yes.
So the election was won on a manifesto of change. The honeymoon period, I think, is over because what's been introduced in that early start, you would think would be some big changes to emphasise the promises that were made. It feels very much like almost Conservative 2.0. Right. It's the same film but with different actors, and I'd suggest that the current actors aren't doing the job as well as the previous ones.
And can I ask you, did you vote Labour at the election?
I did not vote Labour, no.
You didn't? OK. Woman there. Yes, in the colourful top, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what a lot of people have said. I think the honeymoon period is definitely over. I don't think a lot of people will forgive the Labour government for what they've done to the pensioners of this country, the most poorest and vulnerable people, to take away the fuel allowance from people that are earning £12,000 a year is mean and miserable, and I think people will have a long memory. I actually believe this will be a one-term government, and Labour have shot themselves in the foot.
Right, Nick, so you've waited very patiently. Yeah, I mean, I imagine for you, I mean, you were saying, give them a chance. But then you've got at least a couple of Labour voters here saying, you know, we voted Labour, we've always voted Labour, and we're really disappointed.
Well, look, first of all, we knew from opposition that if we were to be given the privilege of forming a government, that this was going to be an extraordinarily difficult inheritance. We frankly didn't know quite how difficult it was until we actually got into power. We found a £22 billion gap, not a future gap.
Stop it.
Not a future gap.
It's not true.
But a
Hang
gap.
on, let him answer, because I've let you all
The Treasury won't release the details, Nick.
Come on,
Hang on,
come on.
I've let you answer. Let's let
Nadhim,
Nick has sat here very patiently. It's his turn
if
to answer.
Nadhim doesn't want to take my word, he should take the Office for Budget Responsibility. The independent body is doing a review into how the last government hid figures from them. Unless we stabilise the economy this year, in this financial year, actually fill that £22 billion black hole, we are taking risks with the economy, and we will be going back to the situation that we had when Nadhim was in the government, so he knows it very, very well, when Liz Truss did exactly that, took a massive risk to the economy, and we saw the risk that produced to pensions, we saw the results that that had in mortgages, and this government will not do that, even if it means, as it does, taking difficult decisions. That is what we are doing, but we are doing it to stabilise the economy so we can fix the foundations and then build a better Britain. And people were challenging, saying, well, you know, how is it different from the last government? In the 11 weeks we've been in power, planning reform, the foundation of GB Energy, railway nationalisation, National Wealth Fund, these are things that the last Conservative government never would have done. We've already done those things in 11 weeks. It's frankly more than they managed in the 11 years before.
So obviously we've seen the Labour conference. Conservative conference about to start. I remember the Labour conference from the year before, and there was a real feeling of it's probably coming your way, it's just around the corner, a real feeling of optimism and kind of vim in the room. And at this one, not everybody, of course, but quite a few people just feeling it was a bit kind of depressing.
Well, I didn't find that at all. I think, but I've been to enough party conferences in opposition. I can tell you the ones when you're in government are a lot better. But what I saw was a sense, firstly, of the scale of the challenge. I think people realise, and we're not hiding that, we've been very open about the scale of the challenge, but also a real determination at this conference to deliver. And I know, and I always listen to what people say, and I say to the gentleman at the back who asked the question and what you were saying about if there were an election now, but what I say to people is judge us on delivery. Judge us on what we deliver for the British people over the next 4 or 5 years.
OK.
Can I ask you a question, Nick?
Briefly, because I want to move on.
I mean, credit where it's due. There are some things that your government is doing that I and the Greens support. Rail renationalisation, for example, GB Energy, I think those are really promising. But when you say that difficult decisions have to be made, why is it that your government seems to be repeatedly making decisions that are difficult for the poorest in society?
We're not. It's true, we've had to take the very difficult decision to means test the winter fuel allowance, but at the same time, Rachel Reeves has put more money into the Household Support Fund to try and help people at the margins as best we can. And we are prioritising the poorest in society. We are taking action, like, for example, putting VAT on private school fees, which will come in January. We're extending the windfall tax on the oil and gas giants. We're dealing with the non-dom tax regime. So, of course, fairness is at the heart of what we're doing, and you see that again in the budget on the 30th of October.
OK. Let me move on, take another question now from Tim Bevan.
What positive action has the Labour government taken to stop the small boat crossings as they approach 3 months since taking office?
OK, well, Nick, this is also a question for you, but I will come back to you in a moment just to give everyone a bit of a shout. Zia.
Well, it's obvious that the first action that Labour took was to cancel the Rwanda programme. And as much as it was a bone-headed programme, given that the Conservative government paid for it up front, it was a deterrent. So Labour took away the deterrent for no apparent reason. And the proof of that, now it looks like Germany. Now it looks like
the Rwanda plan.
We weren't in favour of it, but once it's already in place and paid for up front, £230 million of British taxpayer money paid for up front, Keir Starmer cancels it on day one, removes the deterrent. And as a result of that, in the 80 days since Keir Starmer has taken power and has been in Downing Street, compare that to the last 80 days of the Conservative government, the number of people crossing the Channel illegally has grown by 60%. Keir Starmer promised to smash the gangs. All he has done is smash his own credibility.
OK, but let's just examine your policies for a minute. So are you saying, Nigel Farage has been very critical of the Rwanda plan, says it's nonsense, effectively. So on the one hand, you're saying there shouldn't be the Rwanda plan, and now Labour have got rid of you, saying you're criticising them as well. So you want it both ways.
Two things can be true at the same time. The Rwanda programme was boneheaded because there hasn't been the courage inside Westminster to cancel, to leave the European Court of Human Rights, replace it with the British Bill of Rights, which puts the rights of British people first. That's the first step. Then secondly, we need to say that anybody who comes to this country illegally cannot be granted asylum. So we actually understand how incentives work, which clearly Keir Starmer does not. If you do those things, the boats will stop coming very quickly, and that would also mean that we can pick up the boats as they come in, take them back to France, which, by the way, that has happened. You know, and Nigel Farage made this point during the general election and said our Royal Navy could take those boats back to France. He was roundly pilloried, essentially, by the left, claiming that, oh, there was no way that could happen, that the French Navy would get involved. Well, what happened? A few weeks ago, Border Force took a boat back to France, and it was accepted back. For some reason, presumably because it actually worked, that has stopped happening. So that is how you stop those boats.
So what you're suggesting then is that, on the one hand, there shouldn't be the Rwanda plan, but there should be the Rwanda plan. And when it comes to boats, you're suggesting, but en masse, people that come over on small boats should be picked up and put on the shore in France. And you think France would accept that? And you think France would accept that?
It's already happened. I don't think
I'm not talking about a handful, I'm talking about en masse.
So you have to do all of those things at the same time. Firstly, you leave the European Convention of Human Rights, replace it with the British Bill of Rights. You utilise our Royal Navy. We spend £52 billion per year on defence. The notion that the United Kingdom cannot take back dinghies back to France is absurd.
Okay, and so you think the French government would accept that?
I think that would be a difficult conversation. If we're not going to have a difficult conversation with France about the sovereignty of this country and the security of our borders, then explain to me what on earth we would have a difficult conversation with France about.
All right, now, Nick, as I said, I'm going to come to you. So, Carla, the question is about stopping the small boat crossings. Now, in the Green Party website, you want to see a world without borders. So, presumably, you might not want people coming across the small boats because it's potentially fatal, but you're very happy to let anyone come who wants to come.
I'm really glad that Labour have scrapped the Rwanda scheme. It was incredibly expensive and incredibly cruel. Putting aside the sort of long-term goals of a world we'd like to see, which is what that particular line you're referring to is about.
Well, just explain what that is so we understand.
Well, what's in our manifesto is about...
Well, this is on the website, on the party website. The Green Party wants to see a world without borders. So what would that look like to everyone here?
So that's more of about a long-term vision where there is more, where everyone has more freedom of movement, and where we're more welcoming, we have a more humane approach to immigration. But that's very much a different.
If there are no borders, that means anyone who wants to come could come.
But that's very different to the world we're in now. And as someone said,
it's on your website, so I presume you mean it.
Said, you know, we've got to work from the situation we're in now. And so our approach, what we had in our manifesto, and what we've been pushing the successive governments on, is about a more humane approach to immigration. And so I'm really glad to see that the Rwanda scheme's been scrapped, but I'm pretty worried to see Starmer visiting the far-right Italian Prime Minister to get tips on how to deal with immigration by intimidating asylum seekers out of seeking refuge from political oppression and violence. You know, I think
from France. They're coming from France, which last I checked is a safe country.
It is a human right to seek asylum in the country of your choice, and it's a legacy of colonialism that there are many people across the country who have links to the UK.
Because of colonialism, Britain should now have open borders?
And so they have a right to claim asylum here. The UK takes actually a pretty small number of asylum seekers compared to many other
because
countries.
we're a smaller country, per capita, we take a lot more. Because we're a smaller country, per capita, we take a lot more than France and Germany.
The vast majority of refugees are displaced within their own country or to the immediate neighbouring countries. I'm just saying that the UK should be taking its responsibility to support people fleeing war and oppression seriously.
All right.
And while I'm glad that the Rwanda scheme is gone, there is still an awful lot more that the UK could be doing. Chief amongst those would be ensuring that we allow safe and legal routes for those fleeing oppression and violence to apply for asylum from overseas, because that's the real way to tackle the issues with small boats. That's the real way to stop deaths in the Channel, is to give people those safe and legal routes to apply, acknowledging that the majority of people who travel by those routes are granted asylum. They are recognised as refugees, and the UK does eventually recognise its responsibility to support them. Let's not force them into the hands of traffickers to do that.
All right, let me come around here. Just to correct you, France does take more per capita in terms of asylum seekers than we do. I think Germany might as well, but France takes more per capita. We are quite far down the list.
Can I just come in for a second?
No, let me just ask this woman here. I'll come back to you then. Yes.
Thank you, Fiona. I'm interested in Zia's comments about the Reform Party's attitude to asylum seekers, because obviously we all know that you have to be on UK soil to claim asylum
legally, yes.
So are we saying now that if Reform were in charge, there would be no asylum seeking in the UK?
No, I didn't say that. What we need is a coherent immigration policy rather than a shambolic one. We firstly need secure borders. If you don't have secure borders, then you have no control over the people coming and the number of people coming. That's the first point. The second point is we've had a massive explosion in the size of our population. And what we stand for is saying, first and foremost, the sworn duty of the British government is to put the interests of citizens of the United Kingdom ahead of citizens of other countries.
So in terms of the woman's question there, how could asylum seekers legally seek asylum in the UK?
Well, a sensible system could be created to do that, but frankly, far too many people have come here in a short period of time.
Any idea what it might be?
We've had 1.8 million. We've had, just like any country that has a sensible asylum regime, but because we have open borders,
okay, so
because we
don't know what
essentially have a soft-touch welfare state, people are coming here from, as I said, from countries like France. I put it to you again, these are people who are coming here across the Channel. They're not coming from Syria and they're not coming from Gaza. They're coming from France. We should ask ourselves why that is.
Some of them coming from Syria via France, of course, but I hear you were saying the last country they were in was France. Yes, the woman here in the cream jacket, a little bit further along. Yeah.
Hi, I'd just like to comment that it's rich coming from a very hypothetical position, which I feel the Reform Party is coming from. We've had Labour, we've had Conservative governments trying to sort out and actually reinforce our borders. So I have to apologise that I find your statements quite hypothetical. And to Fiona's point, what would be the policy? I didn't hear a strong policy from Reform to say what they would actually do. It sounds like criticism of what has been happening with the government in terms of trying to reinforce our borders. So what would Reform do that is so different from the Conservative and the Labour Party?
So firstly, clearly another representative BBC Question Time audience, given Reform won.
OK, I'm just going to stop you there. Zia. We have a representative proportion of people in here who voted Reform. And now, I don't know if any of you want to put your hands up.
How many people
let's
voted
hear from
for
one of
Reform?
them. We're going to get an answer to your question, but let's hear from...
3.
Well, no, it's not 3. I said who wants to put their hands up. That's a very different matter. One of you... You wanted to say something. Yeah, let's hear from you.
Just to say, really, I voted for Conservative most of my life and felt drastically let down by the Conservative government last time. There was no way on this earth I was going to vote for Keir Starmer, absolutely no way. And I think from what I was hearing from Reform was the only really viable option. It was the only person, Nigel Farage was the only person that I really thought knew what he was talking about and had the country at his heart and at the Reform Party's heart. And I don't believe much that anybody else has said. And I continue with the Labour guy, Nick, sorry, your name is. Since you've been in a couple of weeks, it's just been horrendous. It's one thing after another. And you can sit there all you like and try and defend taking money away from people who are on 13 grand a year. That's going to save you what, 1.2 billion? Did you say you had a 22 billion hole? Come on.
Now, look, I realise you put a question to Zia. Zia has talked an awful lot, so I need to get around the rest of the panel as well. But if I can, if I've got time, I'm going to come back to that. So, Nick, the question is...
what has Labour done, I think?
Yes, to stop the small boats.
Right,
because, so just to put that in context, we have small boat arrivals are up 16% now on the same time last year. And, of course, I don't need to remind you, at least 45 people have died in the Channel this year.
Yes, and let's not forget that. And I, you know, I shadowed the Home Affairs brief for a number of years. I've been down to Dover, I've been across to France, I've been to the French coast to see the work that's done there. I've talked to a number of the different European governments about this as well. What has Labour done in its first 11 weeks? Well, we've started setting up our Border Security Command. We've actually recruited the Border Security Commander, Martin Hewitt. And what that will do is bring together all the different agencies that have been involved in this but haven't been properly coordinated. So whether that is Border Force, whether that is Crown Prosecution Service International, whether that is the police, whether it is working more closely with European partners, including with Europol, because people do not become refugees in northern France. They've usually travelled thousands of miles, and that is why you have to work internationally to bust the model of the people smugglers.
And Martin Hewitt has also talked about deterrence being needed as part of the government strategy. Where do you see the deterrence in your strategy?
Well, first of all, let's just say the Rwanda scheme was an epic waste of money. It wasn't just £400 million, it was £700 million that was wasted on that scheme. Where is the deterrence? Deterrence comes from a working asylum system here in the UK that can actually give decisions quickly, and then people who are not here can then be removed. And indeed, the government has been doing precisely
some
that.
people might say that's not a deterrent, in that you think, well, if you get here and actually you just get to stay here for quite a long time because no one's going to make a decision, actually maybe that's...
Well, no, but that's precisely the problem.
That's less of a deterrent than if you think, well, it might be out there pretty quick.
That is precisely the problem, because there was asylum chaos under the last government, where it was taking months on end and sometimes even longer. That's what the problem was. But this government already, over the summer, has been deporting people who have no right to be here. There's where the deterrent is, a quick system, and then people who then found to have no right to be here are removed.
Nadhim.
So we need safe and legal routes for those who are genuine refugees who are seeking asylum, as we did with Afghanistan, with Ukraine, with Hong Kong.
But that's not something that you did in government. There are all sorts of countries where there were not safe and legal routes, but when they got here on small boats, they were granted asylum. So why didn't you do it while you were in office?
But if you remember, Rishi talked about this.
Didn't do it.
But look, let's get back to the question, because I have limited time, and you constantly interrupt me.
No, I'm just pointing out the contradiction in what you say.
No, but the question is, do deterrents work? Is the problem with small boats a problem for Labour? I think it's a problem for many governments across Europe. If we're really grown up about this, by the way, if you look at Libya, anything south of Libya, there's 500 million people now who are coming under pressure to move, whether it is for political instability and persecution, economic reasons, to Zia's point earlier, or environmental reasons. Clearly, Europe cannot absorb 500 million people. We review our laws all the time, and the European Convention on Human Rights was written at a time when people were less mobile after the Second World War. Why is it that we can't review and look at our rules around movement? Because I think if we don't, and we don't have deterrents, including offshore processing, which other European countries now are looking at, Germany, elsewhere, they're looking at offshore processing, it is a deterrent. On the midnight, Nick, you remember we voted on the Rwanda scheme. There were people going from Northern Ireland back into Europe through the Republic because they began to worry that they're going to actually be processed in Rwanda. So deterrents work. We can sit here all we like and make ourselves feel really happy that we're going to be an open and no borders country. It doesn't work because our services can't cope. The NHS can't cope. Housing can't cope. All these things.
And I think
the Conservatives are talking about this. Robert Jenrick is talking about having Parliament actually decide what quotas we have. Because even on our net migration numbers, what we had last year was way too high, and that was our mistake. 740,000
with respect,
people.
Nadhim, for the entire time you were in government.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Zia. I'm saying we need a grown-up discussion. By us simply sitting around this table and attacking one another, this is going to be a problem for the next decade and the decade beyond. It brought down the Dutch government a few months ago, right? Mass movement of humanity is going to be the biggest issue. Now, there are some countries, right, China for many, many reasons, some of them we don't like, are investing in Africa, right? The UAE is investing in Africa for reasons we do like. We should look at partnering with those countries upstream so we create prosperity in Africa rather than murder and killing and terrorism. That is the real solution.
Okay. Actually, before we move on, I just want to say, Zia, you are right, in fact, that France takes fewer asylum seekers per capita than the United Kingdom. We take more than that. It's important to get that right. OK, let's move on. Take our next question. From Scott Webb.
My son was killed in an alleged drink driving incident in 2022. We have waited almost 2 years for justice. Why have we had to wait so long when most defendants in the recent summer riots have already been sentenced?
So, Scott... as you say, your son was killed in an alleged drink driving incident in 2022. I'm sure I can say that all the sympathies of everybody are with you. Why are you having to wait so long for justice? Let me just tell me a bit about your son before we go any further.
He was perfect. He was fun-loving.
How old was he?
19. Yeah, he was fun-loving. He had so many friends. We had 400 people at his funeral. He knew everyone. Everyone wanted to be his friend. Yeah, he's perfect.
What was his name?
The case is going to be coming to court at some point, so which is why we're not being specific about that. Yeah. But I think you very bravely are talking about it, and you want to make the point. So let me come to you. So when we had the riots in August, for example, people's feet hardly touched the ground before, you know, for violent disorder and all sorts, and they were in the courts very quickly. Yeah. And many people praised Keir Starmer for that. Some people criticised the length of the sentences, but they praised the fact that he got it done so quickly. Then you've got someone like Scott, who's waiting 2 years. I mean, what is the impact on you of that, Scott, the fact that you have to wait so long?
As a family, you know, if we get the sentence and that's all finished, then you can start to move on. But it's just a weight overhanging you all the time, because you know you've sort of got to get to that point, or it's always going to come, sort of thing. So it's just really hard. You just don't get a chance to move on. If you can move on anyway, it's...
Of course. And then there have been other cases that, notoriously recent, there was a woman who came forward, she was raped in 2017, and she still hasn't had her court case 8 years after the alleged rape. What are you going to do about these backlogs?
Yes, and listen, firstly, just Scott, you know, I'm sure everyone on the panel is just deeply sorry to hear about your son, and I can understand how brave it is for you to come on a national television show like this and to speak about him. The backlogs, I'm afraid, built up over the 14-year period very significantly. I've had constituents, as I'm sure you can imagine, as a local MP, who were victims of very serious crime, where they took many years to get to court. And I'm afraid that our court system was just under such severe strain that you ended up in situations like you have with Scott's son, but it's the case for many, many other victims of crime as well. And the issue of that lengthy delay, it is not good for our justice system, but it is also, I'm afraid, hugely difficult for the families of victims, because, as you quite rightly say, you can't get closure.
So what's the main problem that's causing these delays? Is it that there just aren't enough lawyers to meet the demand? Is it the closure of magistrates' courts? What is the key problem here, and can you actually fix it?
It's a combination of things, I'm afraid. It is to do with the much smaller court estate that happened over the 14 years. It is to do with the number of lawyers as well. And clearly, going forward, you know, and this is what the Justice Secretary has said, what the Justice Minister, James Timpson, has talked about, we need just root and branch reform right across our criminal justice system. We need to be much better from start to finish in terms of supporting victims. Like, I won't, again, speak specifically about your son, but I'd be very interested to hear about the support you've had as a family through the court process.
What Scott is saying specifically is the rioters in August were into court and dealt with in a month, and he's having to wait 2 years. So why are you prioritising them over someone like him?
When, obviously, you have emergency disorder on the streets, it had happened previously in 2011 when the previous government was in office and the Prime Minister was Director of Public Prosecutions. In 2011, that was dealt with by very swift justice, so it's done swiftly for a very short-term period to deal with disorder on the streets. But what that obviously doesn't do is deal with the longer-term reform of the system that we need, so we don't have people like Scott coming on shows like this with delays like that.
Zia.
I think the reality is that, once again, this is a second-order effect of the population explosion. Courts are a form of infrastructure, and just like prisons, when we look at law and order, you know, look at any social study about this, you've got a large population of multiple millions. You will have a small fraction that are criminal and a small fraction of that who commit violent crime. If you explode the size of the population in a short period of time, 1.8 million net new people arriving in just the last 3 years, for example, what happens is you see a big spike in the absolute number of violent criminals who are there. This is one reason why our court system is backed up. We don't have enough infrastructure. Again, the fact that our population has exploded so much, and Nadhim, you talked about just last year with respect, it sounds like you accept, the Conservatives time and again promised manifesto after manifesto they would bring net migration down to tens of thousands. It ended up being 750,000 when they left office, and you simply can't build prisons that quickly. You can't build more courts and get more judges and more lawyers that quickly. We don't have enough hospital beds. We don't have enough homes, and that's why a third of our young people, 18 to 35, still live at home with their parents. That's another catastrophe for this country.
Just coming back to the justice system,
it's a second-order effect of the population explosion.
The fact that over half of magistrates' courts closed in England and Wales between 2010 and 2019 on your watch. That would mean there was a pressure on the justice system whether or not there were more people in England and Wales or not.
Agreed. And prisons were closed as well. I agree with that.
So it's not just about the population.
Correct. It's a supply and a demand problem. Agreed.
Nadhim.
Scott, I'm a father of 2 boys, and it's heartbreaking to hear what happened and that you haven't had the closure. I guess the one thing I would say, and I haven't served in my time in government in the Justice Department, but the one thing, Nick, that we did, if you remember, during the vaccine programme, was cut through a lot of the bureaucracy to try and vaccinate the nation. And we took some of those lessons back into trying to fix some other issues around how we do and how we deliver healthcare. And I just wonder whether, if the lesson from the riots is you can do things fast, what else can you learn from that you can actually cut through and process many more people much more quickly through the courts? And rather than just saying, well, that was just a one-off, take the lessons of the emergency and apply them and scale them across the rest of the system.
And listen, the government has a mission to halve violent crime over a 10-year period, and it is going to be about delivering right across government to do that, pulling in both the Home Office, of course, cracking down on crime itself, but also what are we going to do to tackle its underlying causes? Not least, for example, the creation of youth futures hubs to try and divert young people from a life of crime, which is another thing the government will be pursuing.
All right, there's lots of hands up. Let me hear from some of you. Is the man sort of in the middle with a sweater and dark sweater and a white shirt? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, so I hate all of this rhetoric around blaming it on immigration. I think that is just a really poor stance to have. This is a very serious topic we're talking about. This is Scott's son, and I don't think this is the right opportunity to bring up immigration. If we look at the riots that happened recently in the UK, these were predominantly white supremacists who were, taking a stance and actually being very publicly racist. So I just want us to all be, grown-ups here and stop bringing in things like immigration into a very serious topic.
Okay. In the blue T-shirt, yes.
Yeah, I think exactly the same kind of point, really. We found a way throughout this whole debate this evening to constantly bring the issue of immigration in and demonise, again, people that are only trying to get here to live a better life. And I think back to Nadhine's point in terms of, obviously, it'd be great to see that investment in terms of because we need to solve the problem root cause. But the biggest issue here is that we've had 14 years of a government that basically failed to invest in the infrastructure, let the infrastructure go that a previous Labour government had built to a point where we had an incredible NHS, we had credible schools, etc. And then we've seen every single piece of our government fail over these last 14 years. And we need to we come back to one of the questions earlier, we need to give this government a chance. They've been in 11 weeks and we need to allow them to make the changes to turn this oil tanker around because it's going to take a number of years to get this right. And that we just need to... And if they don't do it, at the end of the day, they won't be in power in 5 years' time. Simple as that.
In the middle there, yes, in the yellow top.
I'd like to go back to what Fiona said about women and possibly men who are survivors of rape and are waiting for years and years to have their case heard. Often the perpetrators are on bail as well. And I think in a society where we're trying to encourage women and men who are survivors of rape to come forward, this situation is just deterring that. Women don't want to come forward when they know that they'll have this hanging over them for years.
For years. And yes, you at the back there.
As evidenced by our conversation here now, our prison and justice system is broken, to say the least. And to my understanding, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, there have been propositions and considerations of giving certain offenders early releases from their sentences. Is this really the right answer to fix the system?
Right. Well, that has already happened. The government has already released certain categories of prisoners, some that shouldn't have gone out, as has emerged recently. 40% of the way through their term, as opposed to 50% of their way, to try and ease the crisis. But I gather in 9 months' time, you're going to be back to square one. So you're going to have to think about what you're going to do then. Carla, we've not heard from you.
Well, first of all, I want to say, I will come to that point, but I want to say thank you to the last three people who spoke, especially you took the exact words out of my mouth, the danger and irresponsibility of blaming immigrants for what is really the consequence of well over a decade now of chronic underfunding of our public services. And the fact that justice delayed is justice denied. And our justice system is clearly very broken, has been horribly under-resourced, so that families are not getting the closure they need, they're not seeing the justice they need. There are courts with buckets catching drips of water from the ceiling. Legal aid has been demolished. Now, you know, I was last on Question Time a few months ago. I'm now an elected MP since then. And goodness me, a huge amount of the casework I do for the constituents that live in my part of Bristol is around injustice caused by failures of the legal system, and in particular the cuts to legal aid that mean that your ability to access justice is more of a function of how much money you have access to than anything else.
We've got a couple of minutes left. Scott, I want to come back to you. Sorry, let's just move this microphone back to Scott a minute. What do you think about what you heard? Is there anything else you want to add?
I just want to really add that obviously this is drink driving, and there's no adverts on telly anymore about warnings about drink driving. You know, so I'm just thinking now, you know, is it with Christmas coming up, there'll be an increase in drink driving. Is it now time to think about lifetime bans for drivers that kill while over the limit?
I mean, drink driving death. Drink driving deaths are at their highest for 13 years. Is that something that you might consider?
It's a deep concern, and obviously we keep all these things under review, of course. And I just wanted to come back briefly, Fiona, if I may, because the point that was raised about the terrible crime of rape, I thought was a really good one. We inherited a situation in this country where of every 100 rapes reported to the police, fewer than 2 even get near a court, let alone get a conviction. And this is something, there's a mission for this new government to deal with. And I think we do need to set up specialist rape courts so that we can deal with that crime more quickly.
And to Scott's particular question...
Just one moment. We also need to set up specialist rape and serious sexual violence units in every police force, and we also need to have specialist domestic abuse specialists in every 999 control room. It's a huge issue that we need to deal with, and that's why it was raised. I want to raise it. To Scott's direct question, obviously we always keep these different laws under review, and in terms of drink driving, it's one there's been a number of campaigns on in Parliament over the years, and your point about awareness, by the way, I think is absolutely spot on. You usually tend, don't we, to get an increase in those advertisements towards Christmas, but it's absolutely vital people understand the consequences of drink driving.
OK. Scott, I'm afraid we're going to leave it there. Forgive me, because I'm out of time, but I hope you feel that you've had a fair shout, and good luck to you. That's all for this week. Thank you very much to the panel, to all of you for coming along this evening. Thank you very much to our audience, and of course, thank you to you at home for watching. Don't forget Dundee next week if you want to be part of the programme. Until then, from Milton Keynes, bye-bye.